Hi and welcome back to the second episode of this three-part series of recreating Flappy Bird in Unreal Engine. Links to the other episodes are in the description below. Alright, so what we're going to try to achieve in this video is to add the background, of course, add the wooden blocks that will be the obstacles for the player, and also introduce death so that whenever we touch any of these obstacles, the player will die. Yeah, let's jump right in. As usual with Unreal, we want to create a new blueprint. So in your blueprints folder, create a blueprints class. This is not a pawn. This is not going to take any input. This is just a standard prop. So we're just going to select actor. We'll call it background and double click to open it up. Okay, well, what we could do is we could just add a sprite, just like we did before, paper sprite. And then we select our, well, we would have to create a sprite. So you would have to do the same. So in order to get a sprite, remember how we had to create sprites from our sprite sheet? You have to do the same. So let's say we choose our trees here. Now the reason they're separated because we want to move them at different speeds so that we get a sense of parallax. So sprite, so you can say create sprite, okay. And then in our sprite sheet, we select our background and voila. However, now it's going to become very difficult to move this thing. Like we could move it and then create a new one that comes in and takes over, but that's not very elegant. So I'm not actually going to do it this way. I'm going to delete this paper sprite. I'm going to come back and delete our sprite because we won't need it, because we are going to create our own material that actually has this feature. So just a moment. I need to go to the washroom. All right, I'm back and I didn't wash my hands. Haha. Okay, so we're creating our own material. So let's go back out here and create just a new folder. You know, you got to be organized, right? Materials. And create a new material. So you're learning so much in this little video. So cool. So many different things. Should probably hit subscribe and like the video if, you know. Material. Okay, we'll call this background sky. Let's start with the sky because we're going to have to make one for each. Okay, great. Now you have a material. You double click that bad boy and okay, let's see what we're going to do. So this is the material editor and this will take in a bunch of parameters based off lights and stuff like that. Now, because this is a 2D game, we don't actually want to deal with any of that stuff. So if you look down here to your left, shading model, default lit, we want to say unlit, okay? And you see now it turned off a bunch of stuff. So emissive color, that's going to be an illuminating color. Don't worry, it won't cast light or anything like that. But it's basically saying that it doesn't need any light source to actually render that color. So that's what we want. This is perfect. And also very lightweight. This works really similarly to the blueprint stuff. You just right click and you can search. Obviously there will be different things in here because this is now dealing with materials. But the concept is very similar. So right click and say texture. Just search for texture. Texture sample. Perfect. It's so easy. Texture. Click. Choose your sky and boom, done. Plug that in here, emissive color, and you got yourself a little emissive color. One thing we need to do though is because we're going to map this onto a plane, we need texture coordinates. Don't worry about it. Just right click, search for COO texture coordinate, plug that into the UVs and it'll work. So let's try this. We'll save this material, apply it, just to, make sure I'm not tricking you. And we can go back to our blueprints and background. So in here, let's add a plane. Okay. We'll call it sky. And in our material here now, we can actually add our background sky as a material. And now it's obviously not in the right orientation, but if I just rotate 90 degrees, look at that. Now we have our sky. How beautiful is that? Because I'm so nice, I've set it up so that it'll actually tile. So now we can actually start scrolling this and it'll seem seamless because, yeah, I'm very nice. You're welcome. Well, the problem though is that it's static. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, we'll come back to our material. And there's actually a really simple thing you can do, and it's called panner. So just right click and search for panner. And plug your coordinate in there. And then replace the UV with this. And you'll see you have this neat little thing now that has time, like it's got the speed and everything. So speed X, like if we say something like 2, I don't know, is that fast? Hard to say. Oh, oh, whoa. Yeah, okay. See that? That's pretty cool. Can sort of slow it down. Obviously, it's hard to judge. I'll just set it to 1 and apply that and go to background. I can already say that that's probably too fast, but anyways, I think it's okay for now. We just want to get this into the game. So why don't we drag that in? We're gonna set it to the origin. You do that, and if you just go to your, I'm gonna close world settings. We don't need that right now. So you just go to your location, click this little thing, and now you're at the origin. All right. So because we said we were gonna apply a scale of 10 to everything, I'm gonna do the same. Group them and 10. You know what? I'm also just gonna move it back a little. So one thing that I haven't talked about that I should have talked about is the player controller. So we assigned this Flapman to be the pawn of the game, but where does that spawn? Like, you know, where does that spawn? So you have something here, and it's called the player start. So that's where it will spawn. So, you know, you can move that, but I'm going to leave it. I want it to be I want to spawn right in the dead center. So let's try that. Okay, cool. Look at that. Now it looks like Fartman here, is flying through the sky. Well, it's a little small. Let's make it bigger. But to be honest, I'm going to put the scale back down to 1 because I want to start handling this inside the background instead. So I figured out that around 20, a scale of 24 is pretty good for covering the screen. All right, yeah, you see now it's pretty good in the top there. You can adjust it yourself, but that's what we kind of wanted. I think it could even be a little smaller. Let's try 22. Yeah, that's pretty good. We're going way too fast though. I'm getting the jizz. Let's slow this down a little. It's a little fast. I'd say 0.1. It doesn't need to be fast at all. We don't want it to be distracting. Yeah, see that's probably even too fast, I would think. But let's get the trees in there as well. So in our background, the problem right now is we're not really covering the sides, right? So let's do that. It's pretty easy. Now that we have that set up, you can just Control W that, and you just drag it off to the side. I think that's it. And then 2200, so copy that and just say minus 2200. Excellent. And great. Now it's covering the whole thing. And see, it's seamless now because I did all that work for you. Okay, next up, we're gonna add the trees as well, and then we'll be done with the background. See, we're moving quick, moving quick, moving quick. Obviously, because we want a different speed on the trees, we're gonna have to make another material. So let's do that. Materials. We can even just copy this one. So just right click, duplicate, rename it to background trees, and double click that bad boy. And here, BG trees. And now we can even just duplicate that, move it forward a little bit. Call it trees. Change the material to background trees, and there you have it. Well, the problem right now though is that the sky is blocking, but if you look at my actual text, texture, you'll see that it's halved here. So why is that? Well, because we're not actually carrying over the opacity. So let's fix that quickly. Okay, but you'll see that the opacity is grayed out. So why is that? Well, it's because if you look in the settings for the background trees down here, you'll see that it says opaque. So you want to just change that to masked, and the opacity mask will become available. You just take your alpha channel, plug it in, and there you go. You can see it's cut off now. So apply that and look at your background, and yeah, that's it. Now you see. That's great. That's exactly what we want. So we're just gonna do the same with this one. Duplicate it, move it to the sides. So what did we say? 2200? 2200, because they're the same size. That should work. Indeed it does. And minus, and there you go. Let's try this out. Ooh, look at that. We've got a background, and it looks like we're flying without actually flying. How cool is that? Maybe it's not that cool, but you see that the clouds move at the same speed as the trees. Looks a little boring. So like I said, why don't we slow down the clouds a little bit? Maybe 0.075. And to be honest, we can probably speed up the trees a little. 0.5. All right, let's try that. Make sure you save all your materials, otherwise they won't apply. And all right. That's awesome. Now we get a sense of depth. The trees are closer than the clouds. So now we have the illusion that we're flying through the sky, and pretty much the only thing left to add now is the blocks. What we're going to do with those is we're basically just going to take them and move them across the screen, and then the player has to jump in between them. So again, I'm going to create a new blueprint. It'll just be an actor, just like the background, and we'll call it block. So for this block, we're going to use this tree trunk. Right, okay. So but remember, we got to turn this into an actual sprite if we want to use it as a sprite. And we do in this case. So go ahead, sprite action, create sprite, done, boom. And you can come back to your freshly created block and open it right up. I'm going to put it in here. So start by adding sprite, paper sprite, tree, upper we'll call it, because we're going to use one on the upper side and one on the lower, right? So we get a gap in the middle. So just go in, choose your tree, and there you go. We're using a scale factor of 10, so let's do that first. 10, yeah. Let's just move it up a little, because obviously it's really hard to say. See, it's really hard to tell. We're just gonna have to guess. 1300 maybe. Might be a little tight. Let's see. So go ahead and duplicate, and we'll call that lower. And then we're going to set that to be negative. So negative 1300. Cool. I'm just going to try dropping this into the game because, you know, for fun. Oh, okay. Whoa. All right. So obviously we'll fix that. Don't worry about it. I'm going to move it over a little bit. I'm just going to move it over. So just like gauge. You know, it looks a little tight. Yeah, I think we'll open it up a little bit. But, you know, as you know, let's say 1350 maybe. As you know, you can always tweak these things. Just make sure that they're the same. Don't have them be different. You need these to be the same. This should be the negative so that they're centered. Otherwise, things will break a little. Anyways, we'll call this our block for now. All right, so before we make these blocks move, I think let's just set up a spawner so that we can get them to spawn every second or so. Delete that. Save your level. Oh, a little special tip here, just throwing in there. If you've paused your project and you've saved and you closed your game down, you may have noticed that it opens up to a default level. And that's because you haven't set your default level yet. So our level is the Flappy level we created. So if you go to your settings, project settings, and go to maps and modes, you can see your default maps here, right? So right now they're something else. So we want to set these to Flappy level and Flappy level. So now when you open up your project the next time, you'll be right in the Flappy level and ready to go. Anyways, thought I'd throw that in there. To make the spawner, let's make another blueprint. It's going to be a separate blueprint. Make it an actor. You know the drill by now. Block spawner. Let's open that up. So we're not going to need any components for this object. All we're going to do is we're going to start adding some blueprint code here. So what do we want to do? Well, it's going to be pretty simple, really. So I'm going to look at this event tick because this is something we want to happen all the time, right? Obviously not every single frame, but I'll show you. So let's just say first, let's start somewhere. Let's start with how often do we want it to spawn? Well, every second maybe. Okay, great. So let's just drag this out here. Set a delay. Set it to 1 second. And now we know that whatever comes after here is going to fire once every second. Cool. Next, well, we're going to need to spawn something. So I'd like to just draw that out. Say spawn and also spell spawn right. Yeah, okay. Spawn actor from class. That sounds right. Okay, let's try that. And in this drop-down list, you can choose. So let's search for our block. And there it is. Oh, look at that. So that was pretty easy. So now this, in theory, will spawn a block. But we need to say where it's going to spawn. So we want that to be where this block spawner is. So we're going to place it in the world where we want the blocks to spawn. I think that makes sense. So let's do that. We'll just drag down the default scene root. Get the transform. So we say transform. Get world transform. There you go. And plug it in there. Let's test this. So in the world, we're just gonna drop in the spawner. We'll just reset its transform and maybe move it over a little bit so it doesn't spawn on our guy. But in theory, we should be spawning a block every second. There you go. Wow. Oh, and check that out. So hold on, I'm gonna eject a little quickly here. So you can see now how every second we get a new block here. That's very cool. You don't see it because they're obviously being put on top of each other, but now if we set a velocity for them, they'll keep coming. So let's do that. Now, it might make sense to sort of shoot the block out from the spawner, but we're not actually going to do it quite that way. We're going to actually go into the block and just make sure that whenever the block is alive, it's just constantly moving at a constant speed. So each block will be in charge of determining its own speed, so to speak. Oh, this is going to be fun. So up until now, we've just added forces in physics to make something move, but that's not the only way you can do it. You can actually just set the transform. So this is going to be a bit of a different way. It's a more basic way to do it. So what we're going to try to do here, instead of adding a force, we're just going to try to set a new location every single frame based on where it was last frame. It'll make sense in just a second. Let's start with just trying to set the transform. So drag down your default. So we're in our block. So drag out from here, search for set location. Okay, set world location. Yeah, that's the one. All right, so if we were to execute this on every single frame, it's just gonna set it to be here, right? Now that's not great because it won't change. It'll just always be there. But what we can do is we can get the current location of the block. We'll just duplicate this node, right? We're gonna first check where it is on this frame. So that's gonna be get world location. And then we're going to add a little value on top of that so that every frame it's gonna check where it currently is, add a little value, and then just keep looping that, which means that every frame we're gonna increment a little bit and add some movement. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our world location and then we're gonna combine it with our own vector. So this is a good time to make a vector. So what you can do is you can make vector. So it's going to be a vector. So we're just going to take our current position plus vector. So we definitely want to do this. And then we're going to plug this to be our new location. So hopefully this makes sense that we're basically checking every frame where we are and then we're adding a small number to it so that every frame we move it a little bit. Of course, this will also be frame rate dependent, so we do want to take our delta seconds and multiply our vector with this. So an easy way to do that, because we're basically going to want to push it in negative x, right? Because we want to push it, well, I guess for you it's this way. We want to push it backwards. I'm going to make float, make literal float. And let's say it's one unit. We're going to now multiply this, float times float. You can, I mean, this, it would make sense to do something like this. Plug that in there. Okay, so now we're doing the same thing we did for the force down, remember? So we're just compensating for the frame rate. I just want to mention that in this case, you do actually need to compensate for the frame rate because the set world location does not compensate for the frame rate internally. So I just wanted to make you aware of that you cannot skip this step right here. So we plug that into the X. And now we can set our number. Actually, it was going to be negative. So we'll set it to -1 and we'll see what happens. It might be a little slow because we are multiplying with the delta seconds, but we'll see what it looks like. A lot of this is just trial and error. Okay, so it's not moving at all. Well, you know what? It is moving. I see it moving ever so slightly. Why don't we try increasing the speed of this quite a lot? -100. I mean, you never know, right? Might be great, might not be great. Oh, all right. -1000. Whoa. Okay, here you go. Check it out. Awesome. What the fuck? I'm gonna slow this down by maybe half. -500. Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's a little slow. Let's just do -600. Okay, much better, but they're spawning way too close together. So in our block spawner, let's adjust the delay to be like what? Let's try 1.5. Yeah, you know what? This is actually probably pretty good. Okay, let's leave it at that. 1.5. Obviously, we don't want them to spawn like that because they're just appearing on the screen. So what we want to do is we want to take our block spawner. Here it is. And let's move it so that it's outside of the screen. Let's just see if that does it. Nope. Yeah, look at that. Got some trees in our way. There are a few problems. Obviously, this physics thing, we'll deal with that after. It has to do with collisions. But the other thing is that it's just a straight line here, right? Like we're just getting a straight line across the trees. So what we want to do now is we want to make sure that they spawn in a randomized location of our choosing. So how do we do that? Well, in here, actually we're going to do it in each block manually. So anytime that the block spawns, it's going to spawn by the block spawner, and then we'll give it a random Z direction. So if you look here, you've got event begin play here. This is going to fire as soon as the actor is created. So whenever the block spawner spawns the block, the event begin play will fire and never fire again. So this is a perfect opportunity for us to give it a bit of a randomized Z position. Again, it's going to be the same node as this one, set world location. So why don't we just grab this one, because we have it. It's easy. Take that, plug it in here. Boom. Okay, great. Now, how can we determine the location? So what we got to do is we got to find out like how far up or down would we want to send this block, right? So a way to do that is, again, drop in your flap man, just so we get the camera, set it to the world origin, and pin the camera. See, this is a great way to see what you're going to be seeing. So now you drop in your block. Okay, can't see my block. Why? Where's my block? What's going on? Oh, wait. Okay, before you do this, just just don't attach that so that we need it to compile. Okay, drop in your block, reset the transform. And so now we can sort of move this thing and we can see here where it'll end up. So if I move this up, we want to find the, the most extreme position that we would want to place this in. So for example, I wouldn't really want it to go higher than that probably. And that is a value of 630. And so I probably, we want it to be the same for the lower bit. So it would be this, if you say, would like minus 630. Yeah, so you see it's the same. Because we've centered the tree, we now know that that's where it'll end up. And that's why we were so careful about centering that tree. So I think that's pretty good. Let's go with 630. You can go ahead and just delete your block and Flapman. So go to your block and so, okay. Connect these again. Now, what do we want to do? We want to get a randomized number between minus 630 and 630. So there's actually a function you can use for that. So just search for random. So we want a random float, right? But you want this one, random float in range, because what this will allow you to do is to set this range in which it will generate a random number in between. So I'm going to set this to minus 630. And then positive 630, right? And then the return value is going to go into our Z. So we're going to split this struct again and plug it into our Z. Right, so you need your default scene root. Sorry. Let's try that. See what happens. Pretty sure it's going to work. Whoa! Yeah, excellent. Now you might not think it's excellent, but I do. So why are they spawning in the middle? Good question, but let's not look at that. Look at this. It's actually giving us a completely random location in the Z. So why is it doing this in the X? Well, let's look. Because we're actually setting the new world location to be 0 in the X. Okay, we're gonna have to do something similar to how we did down here when we were moving the whole thing. So we need to first establish where is it located in world space, and then we want to add this offset, right? So let's just do that again. We can pretty much copy the code here, but let's not do that. We want to practice here. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to get the default scene root, and we want to get location, get world location. And then what do we want to do? Well, we're going to disconnect this for a moment. And we're going to move it over here. Let's create some space for ourselves here. What do we want to do? Well, we want to take this and, again, like we did last time, plus vector. So we don't actually want a whole new vector. We just really want the Z. So I'll split that struct, plug it into the Z. And now we'll base it off where it already was. But remember, we're only doing it once, so it's not going to interfere with our movement at all. So we can actually combine. So if you split the struct, you can just right click and recombine again. So we'll do that and plug that in and try this. Fantastic, look at that. Look, you just made Flappy Bird. Great. Now this problem though. Okay, so I think we're done with the blocks now. This is pretty much what it's going to be. We do have a little problem here though with the collision. So why don't we move over to that next? So if you go to your block and you look at for example, this trunk, you go down to collision. So we talked a little bit, well, I adjusted some settings before, but now we're going to go a little bit more in depth on what's actually happening. So basically, this collision thing is going to tell us what happens when something collides. So right now we're saying block all dynamic, which basically means that a dynamic object will collide if it runs into this tree. We don't, I mean, yes, you could do that, but we don't really want to do that because really all we want to do is we want to trigger a death animation and a death when we hit a tree. We don't want it to start bouncing around or anything like that. We want to completely control what happens. So if you go to your preset and you go down here, you can actually see that there's a trigger preset, which will basically set up all of these things for you. So you can see block all dynamic and then trigger. It just reconfigures these things. You can also make it custom and set it up the way you want it. But for us, a trigger is really going to do what we need it to do. So I'm going to compile that and do the same thing on the lower one. Okay, and then we're going to try that. Let's just see if we run into a tree, what happens. Right, so as you can see, nothing happens at this point. Great, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so now that we have the collision set up, I think we're ready to do the death trigger and the animation. So let's take a look at that next. So, all right, okay, so what's happening now? We have our guy and we set our collision to trigger. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the tree will tell us when something is colliding. It just won't activate any physics. So we can use that to our advantage and trigger our death script, if you will. We're gonna make a little script that will fire when we touch a tree. So we want to open up our little flap little man here. Okay, if you look here by default, there is a little event here which is called event actor begin overlap. Now that sounds like it might be the right thing, and it is. We're just gonna say when we collide with anything, we're gonna die. All right. So as usual, I'd like to just check that everything is working. So the first thing I'm gonna do is to say print. Let's print string. And so this is going to give us the object you collided with. So why don't we just plug that into the string? It'll convert it for us to a string. And we can see what we collided with. So let's do that. And if my theory is correct, we should be getting a little print message up in the top left. And we do. We collided with block 1. And this should be block 2, block 3, and so on. Perfect. So the game is actually looking at us and it's seeing that we're colliding. It's just not doing anything about it. And that's where we come in. So what happens when you die? Well, basically, we're going to lose control of our character. That's the first thing that's going to happen. So I like to do something a little bit like this. So we're going to create a variable, and it's going to be, this time it's going to be a bool, which is basically true or false. And we're going to call this is alive. Yeah? So if it's true, we're alive. And if it's false, we're dead. Once you've created it, hit compile. And now you'll be able to set the default value. And by default, we want to be alive. Now that we have that, what we can do when we touch something, anything at all, because we can only really touch blocks at this point, is to take our is alive, set that to not. So that would be true and that's false. So now we're setting it to false. Now we're saying that we're dead. Then we can go into our jump section and say a little if statement. So hold down B, click to get a branch. Boom. And the condition is that we're alive. Get. So now we're basically saying we press jump. We're going to check, are we alive? Yes. Jump. No. No jump. Okay, let's try that. So if I touch this now, and I can no longer jump. There we go. So we died. That works in theory. The problem is it's a little boring and we're not really getting any feedback that we actually died. It just felt like, what happened? So we're going to make this a little more interesting than just that. I think that what we want to do is we want to introduce a little jump so that when we touch something, he jumps automatically. So this is a great opportunity to introduce you to functions. So what we have here is a little it's a little script that basically jumps our character. So I want to say that whenever we die, we trigger this jump sequence. So in theory, you could just copy and paste this, but that's a little unclean. So what you can do instead, if you're planning on reusing something, is to just select the nodes you want and right click and collapse to a function. See, now this turns into a neat little node that you can then name. You've got it here, see functions, new function 0, that's that one. So we want to rename that to jump. All right, so if you double click on this, you will see that the nodes you had before are now inside here. This is a very neat way to keep your blueprints organized. And now I can just duplicate this and plug it in here. So when we die, we trigger this little jump, and we're good. So let's try that. So I will deliberately not jump now. Oh, look at that. We jumped. Perfect. Already starting to feel a lot better now. I got a feedback without doing anything. However, if I press jump very close to when I touched something, I might mistake it for my own jump. So we want to do something a little extra to this to really make it clear that we died. And I think that I'm going to add a bit of a rotation. I think that's a pretty nice way to do it. So again, let's just see what we get here. Well, we want to add it to our capsule. Right? Remember, we don't want to do it to the camera, so we'll drag our capsule down. Add torque. Right? It's just like add force, but this is torque, so it's going to add rotations, right? So we'll just do add torque in degrees. Okay, so which way do we want to spin in? Well, you can take a look in your viewport and spin around a little. So it's going to be the Y, right? So along the Y axis. So Y, we'll just add, I don't know, 10,000. Right? That's how we do it. We just blast it and we'll see what happens. No. Still way too weak. Let's just add a 0. 100,000, man. Whoa! Perfect. Let's try rotating the other way. Negative. Might be even cooler. Whoa! Awesome. But you see what I mean? Like now we definitely feel that we died. You can do other cool stuff like add camera shake and stuff, but it becomes very obvious to us that we died now. It's like, oh shit, I lost control of my character. He's rotating. We get a visual feedback that it's game over. One more thing that's related to death is that currently we can go as high as we want and then he'll just come dropping back down, and we can drop down to infinity. So we want to place blockers at the top of the bottom as well. We're going to create a new blueprint for that. We'll just call it something like out of bounds, and it'll just simply consist of a solid. So we'll do a box collision. Yes. Let's just make it like this, maybe. Just try that. And 100. All right, let's try that. So we just want to add it to the level. Yeah, that looks like it's going to be, yeah, that's going to be the right size for sure. Reset it and just move it down. Okay, way too high. Okay, great. Actually, one more thing. I think make sure that you set your collision to trigger on your out of bounds volume. It looked like it was triggering physics now. Okay, yeah. So just move that down a little bit more. That's a little unforgiving. A little bit more. Great. Okay, so you might want to just also try playing, like, what feels natural. If it triggers too soon, then you feel like you got cheated. That's probably pretty good. Now you can just duplicate this. So you can hold down Alt and drag it up. So we just want to do the same thing. So that's at minus 1340. So we'll just put it at 1340, and we'll just see if that feels right or not. So, you want to be able to go a little bit. Now you may notice that it's never coming back down. So why is that? Well, let's move it down and see what happens. I'll just use that. All right. Boink. Okay, so we have this problem that we keep bouncing. And the same goes for if we go on the trees, right? Like we just keep bouncing off them, right? And that's not really what we want. And we keep also increase the spin speed. So, well, we'll put that back to where we had it and we'll test it later. But let's fix this problem first because it becomes hard to test now. So I want to essentially say that we only want to do this if we're alive, right? We can only die once. So we're doing that, we're jumping, we're adding the torque, and we're basically saying that we're dead. And then we touch another tree and we jump again, because there's nothing blocking us from running this again. So what we can do here, we just add another branch and we will check the alive thing. Are we alive? If true, trigger death. If not, do nothing, right? Let's try that. Right. Okay, so now we're good. Which means that we can also test the top. That felt fair. Yeah, at this point, I feel like we pretty much have a game. We can jump, we can avoid our obstacles, and if we touch one, we die. And we can't leave the top or the bottom of the screen. And that's pretty much all there is for game mechanics. So congratulations, you just created Flappy Fart. I mean, you just created Flappy Bird anyways. Well, almost. Not quite. We're almost there. In the next and last episode, we're going to take a look at making sure that the player can play continuously without turning off the game, and also adding a score system so that we can keep track of how many blocks of wood you've passed. Hopefully you're enjoying this series so far, and I can't wait to finish this up. Yeah, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!